In the last days of the war, the British Army was pushing into Austria, where they discovered thousands of Ukrainians in German military uniforms.
We had the shambles of various nationalities. We were tired. We wanted to get rid of the buggers, you see, and go home.
In 1945, Dennis Hills was a major in the British Army.
The job of the army was to clear the place, get rid of the rubbish.
They simply gave these men marching orders. They said, head southwards towards Italy and someone will take care of you when you arrive. And that's exactly what the division did. They just trundled off south towards Italy.
Ukrainians were put into a camp at Rimini. There were escapes. In fact, the guarding was very poor in those days. The SS used to run away, and you know, it was slack.
Under the agreement reached with the Soviet Union at Yalta, the British were committed to sending back all Soviet citizens captured in German army uniform or who had served the Third Reich in any capacity.
But the problem was in determining precisely where the men came from. If they were from eastern Ukraine, which before the war had been under Soviet rule, they were liable to be deported. But if they came from western Ukraine, which before the war had been under Polish rule, they were not liable to be sent back.
My job was to find out more or less who the hell they were. I found a lot came from Soviet Ukraine. When I made my report, I made it clear that these fellows should be given the benefit of the doubt. They should not be repatriated.
In the summer of 1945, the Red Army sent a screening team to Rimini.
I remember 4 or 5 officers had an interpreter screening soldiers who refused to participate. They were there to check on the Ukrainians and to try to persuade us so that they be sent back to Russia. They couldn't even get into conversation with these fellows. They were simply dumb insolents, you know. The question of war criminals did arise, and the Soviet military mission did give us a few names. And these names were handed in to one of our captains, and I think he looked at them and threw them in a waste paper basket. Propaganda. You can't believe all this rotten nonsense.
But 2 years later, the British decided to check for themselves if there were war criminals in the camp. They sent a screening mission led by Brigadier Fitzroy MacLean.
It became quite clear to me that this was a hopeless proposition. We were not qualified to screen Ukrainians. We didn't have the necessary language experts or anything like that.
It was very difficult for MacLean, in the absence of any personal documentation, army paybooks, etc., to work out just who these men were, where they'd come from, what units they'd served with. He basically had to accept whatever it was that they told him.
The Ukrainians told MacLean that the division had only been formed in September 1944 and had been occupied with training and guard duties. They told him that they did not commit a single crime during the entire war.
He made it quite clear to Whitehall that his report was not watertight and he had suspicions about them.
I think it was fairly clear that quite a number of them must have been in the SS as part of a Ukrainian SS division. So there was every probability that there were war criminals amongst them.
MacLean was very honest. He said he didn't have the time or the resources to do a thorough screening and he thought they should be screened later on, which meant being screened in England.
Did that happen?
No.
In London, civil servants were divided. Eventually, it was the Prime Minister Clement Attlee who decided to let all 8,000 men of the Ukrainian SS Division into Britain.
It was unprecedented for such a large number of men to be brought into the United Kingdom without going through any of the normal channels. The news leaked out that a division of Ukrainian soldiers who fought for the Germans was arriving in England. Questions were asked in Parliament that men who'd been involved in war crimes were now being housed in camps in Britain without apparently having been very carefully screened.
The minister, Hector McNeill, told Parliament that the Ukrainians had been screened twice before and that no war criminals had been found.
Hector McNeill was either being deliberately economical with the truth, or in unparliamentary language, lying, or else he had been fooled by the Ukrainians. In either case, what we now know about the division's history suggests that his reply is worthless.
The Home Office has confirmed that Hector McNeill's answer is still official government policy today.
It is quite wrong to insist on the kind of reports that were created immediately after the war in those chaotic conditions as still being valid.
The historical record does not reveal precisely why the British Prime Minister was so generous to the Ukrainian division. There is some evidence that other agencies had an interest in their arrival.
The period from the division surrender until the division was eventually brought back to England is extremely murky. I know for a fact from the people that I have spoken to, a number were trained by Western intelligence agencies, be them American or British, for clandestine operations to take place behind Soviet lines in the immediate post-war period.
And these people had been former members of the Galicia Division?
Yes, indeed they had. That was the basis for them being selected. No question about that whatsoever.
By the time the Ukrainians arrived in the United Kingdom, the British government was fed up with trying war criminals. They had no appetite for further war crimes investigations or war crimes trials.
No member of the Galicia Division has ever been tried for war crimes in Great Britain. And we could find no evidence that any member has even been investigated for crimes committed in the service of the Nazis. Government records which could help expose the guilty men have never been made public.
1,500 former members of the Galician Division live in this country today. It would be naive and unfair to suggest that everybody within the Galician Division was a war criminal. But by the same token, a small element undoubtedly were. They should be pursued and punished, and the rest should be left in peace.
These military formations are presented as those that fought for the liberation of Ukraine. It did not serve Ukraine. It served the Germans. It was not fighting with an armed opponent. It was fighting against civilians, against the civilian population, against defenseless people.
There should be a reopening of the question of the Ukrainian division. Who these men were, how they got here. Why were they not investigated years ago when the evidence and the witnesses were available?
Why destroy a man's life? Why be a shit and punish people?
We are under a moral obligation to bring to justice those who were responsible for an evil crime, even if it was committed over 50 years ago.
You know, if it was 1945, I would order them to be cut and salted. Today, maybe, I would forgive them. But I will never forget this. Never.
Let God judge them according to their own conscience. They should come to terms with themselves for what they have done.